This is just a quick overview of what I'm going to try to cover in a very short period of time. So first and foremost, a background on the Coalition for Health Funding. We were founded in 1970, and we're the largest nonprofit alliance to preserve and strengthen public health investments. We have over 80 member organizations, mostly federal organizations, some state and local affiliates. And then we also, our major mission is to advocate for public health funding across the public health continuum. So everything from NIH and FDA all the way down to the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services agency out of HHS and the Agency for Healthcare Research and Quality. All of those acronyms are up there. This is a slide of the federal budget process. On the left-hand side is what it's supposed to look like. Should everything run smoothly, on the right-hand side is where we are with fiscal year 2013, which we are currently in. We have not finished the process. I honestly can't remember a year when we've sort of been through regular order in a long time. So the current funding resolution, yeah, I had to hand draw those X's in. So we have a current funding resolution that expires on March 27th, at which point Congress will have to figure out what they're going to do next to finish up fiscal year 2013. But in the meantime, we're already starting the process for fiscal year 2014 and thinking about funding levels for different agencies and programmatic requests. I just can't. Okay, there we go. Very quickly, a couple of budget terms that people hear around DC, deficit versus debt. A lot of times they're used interchangeably, but they're actually two separate terms. The deficit is the difference between what the government's taking in, which are known as receipts, versus what the government spends, which are called outlays, each year. And then the deficit is, the debt is just the accumulation of the deficit each year. So we're around 16 trillion right now. It's kind of all over the news for the past 2 years. And then mandatory versus discretionary are really two very important budgetary terms. There's two different types of spending in the government, discretionary and mandatory. Discretionary doesn't mean that the programs are not important. It just means that they are at the Congress's discretion to set the funding levels each year through the annual appropriations process. Under the Constitution, Congress has the power of the purse, so that's what they're doing, and as I like to say, it's kind of lame, the president proposes, but Congress disposes. So going back to that budget slide, process slide, that's kind of where we are. There's two types of discretionary spending. There's defense, which is all military spending, and there's non-defense, which is kind of everything else. Biomedical research, education, border patrol, grants to law enforcement officers, airline, FAA, that sort of thing, transportation, national parks. And then mandatory spending is spending that's enacted by law, so the entitlement programs like Medicare, Medicaid. And to change spending on those programs, you have to change the law. Okay, this is just a pie chart of federal spending for fiscal year 2011, which is the last pie chart I can find for federal spending. You can just notice that the discretionary part of that is less than half of the pie, and particularly health discretionary spending, which includes like NIH and FDA, that's 1.7% of the entire federal budget. This I'm not going to go over. It just shows that we're not bringing in enough money to pay for what we're paying for. So how did we get here? Why are we in this situation? Taking a step back, the Coalition for Health Funding as an advocacy group sort of was looking at the general environment for what was happening. There were several bipartisan commissions. This is going back to the end of 2010, talking about why we really need to do something about our debt and deficit. And the most famous one is the Simpson-Bowles Commission, which is actually the President's Fiscal Commission. And they came up with a plan to reduce spending, both discretionary spending and through entitlement reform, and to raise some taxes. And they felt that they needed a package of about $4 billion to $4 trillion, I'm sorry, fuzzy head. Trillion, billion, it's DC, to really stabilize the debt. So this is what they call a balanced approach. And like I said, this was now, we're going on 3 years ago. what ultimately happened in Congress is known as the Budget Control Act. So in August of 2011, there was the huge debate over the debt ceiling, wherein House Republicans said that they really wanted to see spending cuts in order to increase the debt ceiling. So what we ended up with was what is known as the BCA. The deal called for a cut in spending levels. It set discretionary spending caps, so the total amount you can spend on discretionary spending over the next 10 years. It also set up that fund super committee that we all heard about, and they were a bipartisan committee in Congress. They were tasked with finding $1.5-ish trillion in savings. And in the event that they could not come to an agreement, there was what is known as an automatic trigger to automatically cut that $1.2 trillion. So that was called the sequester, that trigger. It's really what I think we call the price of failure. These are the across-the-board spending cuts. These are like huge buzzwords this week since it's supposed to go into effect on Friday. So you are here at an interesting time. So we have the sequester, we have the fiscal cliff at the end of the year. As we all know, we're all still standing. The fiscal cliff was averted, but the sequester was pushed back to this Friday. In thinking back through all of this, in the past 3 years, discretionary spending has already been cut by $1.5 trillion since all of these efforts began. So that's a significant chunk of change, and that's both defense and non-defense. So why does the Coalition for Health funding care about any of this? One of the things that we thought through as we were seeing sort of the environment and where people were going, where organizations were headed in terms of advocacy, was that NDD as a whole was being cut first every single time. And we are now at the point where NDD is at the lowest level since the Eisenhower administration, which is pretty shocking if you think about it. In totality, it's been cut by 10% since fiscal year 2010. Health in particular has been cut by 5%. And then looking at the Budget Control Act spending caps, we were still in a rather dismal situation. And then on top of all of that, we still have the sequester. So we sort of saw the bigger, felt we needed to look at the bigger picture and think through how can we have sort of a rising tide lift all boats and really engage the larger community outside of public health. So for public health specifically, and you'll hear more about these levels, as I said, we've been cut by 5% since fiscal year 2010. There's been a wide variation in programs. NIH has been relatively flat funded, but that doesn't mean that they're safe from the sequester or further cuts, whereas other agencies have been cut by as much as 14%. I think CDC was by 10 to 12%. And really the sequester is a knockout punch for public health through NIH and FDA, which I know Max and Steve will get into later. So that's sort of where we are in terms of public health. If you take a step back and do the math, completely eliminating public health discretionary spending, non-defense discretionary spending, all discretionary spending funded through the federal government, you still wouldn't balance the budget. So cuts alone are not going to stop deficits and debt. And as a community, we only advocate for discretionary spending. We don't make any comments at the Coalition for Health funding on revenues or entitlements. We don't touch it. We feel that that's Congress's job, but we feel that as advocates, we really need to talk about the importance of the programs that we care about. So the other thing, too, is that we didn't make up our own message of a balanced approach. That came from those fiscal commissions that I talked about. So really, in a post-Budget Control Act world, we felt that this was really a game changer for advocates. There were no more sacred cows. It used to be, and I remember, when I was on the Hill, groups would come in and request an increase for NIH, and we'd say, absolutely, we love you, we want to do this, and it would be done. Now we kind of have to think about where the money is coming from. Members are really skittish about increasing anything. So we just sort of felt like we needed to take a look at the broader picture, the macroeconomic policy. We felt like our free lunch was kind of over, and we sort of view ourselves not even as the entrees. I feel like public health discretionary spending is like the free dinner and rolls that you get with a meal, so we're such a little chunk of it, but we really needed to do something about it. So what we are doing is we co-chair this larger summit. It's called the NDD Summit. It's not really a real organization. It's kind of like this ad hoc network of networks. We don't have a website. We don't have a budget. We kind of do this because we feel that it's really important. And it's an all-for-one approach to advocacy. So we work with all of the other non-defense discretionary groups, energy, environment, transportation, et cetera, education, to talk to policymakers about discretionary spending, why it's important, why they should care, and about the fact that if they continue to cut us, it's still not really going to make a difference in what they ultimately need to do. This is a rundown of actually not so future deadlines as I'm looking at it, since sequestration slated for Friday. I mentioned the continuing resolution expires March 27th. Sometime in April, we are supposed to see the House and Senate budgets. We also are, at some point in the near future, supposed to see a budget proposal from the president. This morning I heard March 18th is what they're shooting for, but with sequester that could get delayed. And then they're supposed to do it by February 1st, so we're already delayed. And then another debt ceiling debate will be coming in May. Right now, Congress passed legislation that's essentially ignoring the debt ceiling until May 18th. So once May 18th comes along, there will probably be another debate. And again, you know, discretionary programs are probably on the chopping block for that. So our 2013 advocacy efforts, very quickly, we are engaged in inside the Beltway and some outside the Beltway activities. We spearheaded a letter known as a Function 550 letter, which is just a budgetary term. It's really just a letter encouraging the budget committee to have sort of a top line total public health funding level, so that then all of our individual groups can go out and talk about what they want to see for, say, NIH or FDA. We also have a letter that we recently sent to the Hill with 3,200 national, state, and local organizations about non-defense discretionary spending, which is a huge feat. And we said originally we were never going to do this again. Of course, we did it again, and we ended up with more signatures, so that's great. So we've had, on top of the letter, some greater media visibility, some days of action over the past couple of weeks. You know, everything that you guys are doing over the next few days is going to be really helpful. Just having people talk about the impact of this and what it means to them personally, maybe using some of the information that you have here along with your personal stories, really does help, you know, spread the message that this is just not good policy. And then finally, our tools to engage, everything can be found on our website, publichealthfunding.org. You can click on NDD United. There's a video about deficit reduction and why it should matter to you. A lot of frequently asked questions about the sequester, and then some draft talking points and letters to the editor and that sort of thing. Along with samples and all of the reports on the sequester can be found there as well. So I guess the bottom line here for us at the coalition was that we all wanted to try to work together and see if we could make a difference. We originally set out to accomplish the impossible, and I think that sort of goalpost has changed a little bit. The impossible right now might just be holding the line. And so I would just say, again, make your voices heard, use your own stories. It's really important to do that, and continue to be advocates for health funding as much as you can.